Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the Firestone Airride Red Label Extreme Duty Rear Air Helper Springs on a 2024 Ford F-250. This is what our airbags look like when they're installed, and it's really nice. They use a lot of brackets here that all bolt together, but there's no drilling required in all of this installation. So really it's not too terribly hard to do. The bags themselves are awesome construction. They're double convoluted. So if you've ever heard of Firestone, they've been around for a long time. And airbags is definitely something they've specialized in. And these are no different for your passenger truck or your 3/4 ton truck. They're going to be super heavy duty, and that's really where it comes into play on a truck like this. You're going to be either using a fifth wheel bumper towing or just have a payload, and this accounts for really salvaging the suspension from sagging too much. So we marked off where we had our truck from the factory. This collar was originally right here when it was stock and unloaded with weight, and that's fine for comfort. But the issue is when you start to put weight, that's really going to take away from the amount of stroke that the shock has. So the airbags fill that void where normally there's jounce bumpers, and those jounce bumpers are pretty short, so it takes a long time for those to really bottom out, and that really just translates to sag. And the airbag filling that void just makes sure that you're able to account for that and pull that sag back and actually get a better ride and stance of your truck overall. So here we have the truck unloaded, so no weight. This is just how it's driving down the road without anything on it. And I used some painter's tape to get a reference line. We have this collar here on our shock, and that way when we do put weight on here, we're going to see how much it drops. But also, once we get our airbags installed, we're going to see a difference between our jounce bumper, because this takes a while for it to make contact with the strike plate. So this shock has to move quite a bit before that even makes contact, and that's where those airbags really come in handy, filling that void. So we're definitely going to keep an eye on here just to show the difference and also be able to get our vehicle back to its stock height once we have a load on there. No matter if you're towing with the fifth wheel, you're bumper towing, or you just have payload in your truck, either way, these airbags are really going to help with the sag. So we have some masonry bricks here. We're going to put in the bed. We're going to see how much this thing squats. Our 250 is definitely able to handle this load, but a lot of newer trucks are just a little bit more comfortable because people are using these as daily drivers. So until you really put some weight on it, that's when you're really going to notice the squat, and that's when you start to feel it in the steering wheel. Anytime you're going to turn, whether you're braking, your headlight heights are going to be a little bit off, and overall that suspension's just going to be really working because it's already compressed. Now you can see our jounce bumper is not even bottomed out yet, but our suspension's really absorbing the weight that's there. So that jounce bumper, if we were to hit some heavy bumps, it is going to probably bottom out, but you can see it's going to continue to sag until that's bottomed out. So if we had a heavier payload in our bed, the truck is going to squat even that much more. So we're going to hit a few bumps here in our parking lot, and already the truck does, the bottom's just kind of hefty. You can kind of feel it squatting already. And as we hit those bumps, it's actually not too bad. And this is a pretty heavy duty truck, so the payload that we're putting in isn't by any means, you know, a stretch for this. It's riding pretty well, but you can definitely feel it's a little bit lighter up front. And that's when you have those really heavy loads, that's when you're going to want all the steering feel you can get, all the braking you can get, just for a little bit more confident driving. So overall, this isn't too terribly bad. But a lot of times that I've seen when we put airbags in, the after effect, just you barely notice anything's back there, and it just makes the suspension a little bit more, a little tougher to be able to handle that weight. Not that this can't, but it's going to supplement your shocks. So that's the problem when you have a load like this. Your shocks are compressed, so you're losing some of that stroke each time. And as we saw before with our bump stops, there's even more that it can squat. And at that point, that suspension's really getting worked at its limit the entire time as you're driving, and that's where the airbags will supplement that, allow it to soak it up, and give your shock that full stroke back. Now, while I'm not really feeling it too terribly much, when I make the turn is when it's super noticeable, and that's where you can kind of feel the truck just kind of lean with that weight there. And when you go to turn back the other way, that's where you really start to notice that sway back and forth. The truck just doesn't feel it's planted. It kind of gives it a top-heavy kind of feel because that weight is really shifting side to side, and our suspension's working as hard as it can to minimize that. These bags in particular are going to be rated at 7,500 pounds capacity, so that doesn't necessarily give you more capacity as far as towing. It's what they're capable of handling, and on a truck like this is going to be able to handle quite a bit of weight. So really, no matter what trailer you throw at it, it's going to be tough to get over 7,500 pounds directly on it. So if you're towing a big old fifth wheel or a gooseneck, these are going to be a great option for you. Now on the flip side is during normal driving when you're not loaded up, you want to make sure it's a comfortable ride. And these, you're not going to notice it when you're just driving around with no weight on it. You just want to make sure you keep it at 5 PSI minimum. That way the bags aren't kind of squishing around. They have a little bit of body to them and they're going to act like a jounce bumper. So normal driving with no weight at 5 PSI should be nice and cozy as it was from stock. This kit does come as a dual path configuration, which means that you have individual control of one side or the other by 2 different Schrader valves. And that kind of comes into play we saw on this truck because it's slightly squatted on the driver's side, and that's because the fuel tank's over there. And the load that you'll be towing might be the same way, so if you want to counteract that load a little bit, you can put a little bit more pressure in one side or the other. Now you can do a single path. You're going to want to pick up a push connect T-union to accomplish that. And that way when you put the pressure in, it'll equally divide it between the bags. This can also be used with a compressor system. We're going to be eventually installing one on here, and it'll play well with any compressor that you pick up. Now we had this out on our test course, loaded up with some weight in the back before we had the airbags, and it did squat quite a bit. So we're going to reload that up. I'm going to adjust the airbags back to a nice factory ride height, and we should see a difference. With our airbags installed, we'll get this weight put back up. And then I'm going to fill it up a little bit and see where it is. We're going to get that sag all fixed. So let's get this thing loaded down. Now with our weight in the bed, we can see where it was sagging originally with our reference tape. And I'm just going to fill this up to get it back to the factory ride height. And this is where if you're considering getting an air compressor on board, it is really nice to be able to do that at the push of a button. Or the flip of a switch, whereas on a manual system like this, it's going to work the same, but you will have to fill it up manually. And we're just about back to factory ride height there, so I'll get our other side set up as well. So to get back to that factory ride height, we have a little over 60 PSI in there, and I could probably let out a little bit here, but these bags being heavy duty, you got a lot of versatility as far as pressure goes. You can go all the way up to 150 PSI. So we have both of these at about 60. We'll take it out and see how it does. We're gonna hit some bumps real quick just to see the difference. Oh, and immediately, just those small bumps there, it just feels like the suspension, how it should be from the factory, honestly. So that's the great part is you can account for that weight. It's super comfortable right now. And just kind of poking through our parking lot here, immediately I can tell our steering is better. It gives it a heavier feel. It's not so loose. And that's because we're getting more contact. That airbag kind of raises the rear, so we get all that contact patch. And the side to side, yeah, it truly feels like there's nothing back there in the truck, and that's something that's really nice. It goes back to just kind of normal driving. If you wouldn't, if I didn't load that in myself with the forklift, I wouldn't really know that there's weight back there. The way that it's driving is exactly how it was stock, which is really nice. Whereas before, pretty loose and just that side to side, you feel that weight. It's not the case here. This is really, really nice. Our first step to get our airbags installed is going to be getting our spare tire out of the way. It's just going to open it up and make it a lot easier to get everything in place and give us a little bit more real estate to work in. And once we have our airbags installed, they're going to live where these jounce bumpers are, and so that obviously means we need to take our factory ones out. But this is a good time to realize that these are pretty short and there's a large gap, so it's going to make a huge difference with those bags in play. And to get these removed, we're just going to take a 15mm deep well socket and loosen up the nuts on both sides. And we can set our jounce bumper aside. We do need to remove our studs from the jounce bumper, and these just kind of snap in. The best way I've found to get these out is if you take a flathead screwdriver and put it on the portion where there's the two indents and just kind of pry this back while pulling back, you'll get this to slide through the slot here. Now be careful, sometimes these can pop off and fly pretty quickly. So again, just kind of pry here, push that forward, and then we can get these removed. Our thread plate is going to replace those studs, so we're still going to be using those holes to bolt our top bracket into place, but this is, instead of having those studs, we have this weld nut on each side. So what we're going to do to get this in place, you'll see this triangle and a square. This is so we can get a zip tie passed through and create a small handle for us. So from this bottom flush portion, feed it in through the square and then through the triangle. And we'll just zip tie this up. We'll do the same on the other side. And these are going to just kind of help us get this in place to get our hardware all lined up. We'll just feed the zip tie in one way and put this through while grabbing this tail end here. And we can just kind of slide this in place, making sure that we have both zip ties run through the large openings where our studs were previously. It might get kind of tight, but if you put it in at a more aggressive angle or to the side, this should get in place. And you'll see those zip ties just allow us to kind of move this around. And what we're going to be looking for is we're going to be running bolts through a bracket up into these holes. So just kind of get this aligned where you can see both of those threads. We're going to grab our top bracket, and we'll see that this one's marked as L. There is an R for the other side. They look almost identical, but we'll make sure that we get it side specific. And it's going to sit on the frame kind of here, and where our zip ties go are going to be through this slot, and that's going to help guide this up. You're also going to want the large cap head screws. These are going to be the longest of the bunch that come with the hardware, and we're just going to try to get these threaded. We don't need to really tighten them down quite yet because we are going to take those zip ties off. So if you feed these through here and then just slowly raise this up, you still have those zip ties there to be able to kind of move that plate around as necessary. But again, just kind of our goal is to get this started on that plate up top. It might help pulling on the zip tie to keep that plate tight. We got a few threads there, so I'll get the back one in place. So with both of those started, we can go ahead, we can cut our zip ties. Now we'll get this tightened down, and we're going to be using a 7/32 hex to get that snug. So I suggest kind of going one side and putting that tight a little bit and then bouncing to the other side. Don't just crank it down on one. That way it draws up nice and evenly. Now we're going to grab our lower spring bracket and our lower frame bracket, and you're going to see that there's some tabs here. We're going to align it just like this. So this should kind of slide up, so the triangles kind of go right next to the other ones here. So this is kind of your finished product. That should curl up. And to get this in place, we have the 1-inch cap screws. We're going to feed that in and then get a serrated flange nut on the other side. Do the same thing here. With our 7/32 hex, we'll put that on the cap head bolt, and then our 9/16 is going to snug down our serrated flange nut. Do that on both sides. With our assembly, we're going to grab the axle bracket, and this is going to rest on the axle, and where the jounce stop is, or the jounce plate, this is going to kind of account for that. It's going to rest on there, but we need to put this in place, and this is going to be a dry fit. So take the cap head screw, it's about a 2-inch here, and we're going to put our 3/8 spacer, which is included in the kit. We're going to start with that. There's a bunch of washers included, and that's to account to make sure that we get this nice and level. So put your serrated flange nut on here first, and we can kind of dial it in as necessary. You don't have to get too tight here, but snug it down to where this is sitting where it's going to be. There's not any slop. And then we slide this in around the joust stop here, and it should sit nice and flat against your leaf spring pack here. Now, there is this brake line bracket here that it's kind of tight. It's not rubbing against the lines. And you also have this electrical here that you want to make sure isn't in the way. So if you need to, what you can do is just pop this out. It's just a plastic Christmas tree to move that out of the way. And once we kind of get this to sit where we want it, what we're looking for is a few things. We want this top portion of our bracket level with the leaf spring pack. So getting a side view of it, aligning that up with the leaf spring pack is kind of what we're looking for, and this tight against it. And then where our bracket is, this is where we can add spacers if we need. We're really just looking to make sure that our lower bracket is parallel with our axle. So adjusting by putting some washers in can adjust that pitch as necessary. But with our 3/8 spacer here, it looks nice and level, and that's kind of what we're looking for. With our bracket sitting level and also making sure that our truck doesn't have any weight on it, it's just on flat level ground, we're going to measure the distance between our top bracket and our bottom bracket, and that's going to determine whether or not we need to use an additional spacer included. So as I measure here, we're at right about 6.5 inches. Now what's interesting is ours is a little bit over that 6.5 just by a hair, but that's enough for us to use the spacer. And I've kind of just dry fit my brackets on the passenger side. And what's interesting on the dry fit brackets on our passenger side is it's actually coming in at about 7 inches or close to it. And the reason being is we have a full tank on our truck, which is on the driver's side. So that probably accounts for that. But either way, since we are over that 6.5 inches, we're going to use our spacers. So since we're using that spacer, we'll put that in place here. Make sure you have the cap as well as that rubber there. And we're going to be using the longer flange nuts now because to account for that space. So pass this up and then take your bag assembly, and you'll see on the bottom side it'll be threaded. So we're just going to thread this on. You don't have to have it too tight. You actually want to make sure that you're able to rotate this a little bit. And what we're going to do, we're going to get our pin put against where the frame is going to be. So align this like that. So it should be lined up. And we're going to take our dust cap off for now. And you're going to want to have a chalk marker or a paint marker or something to make some alignment marks. So now we'll take our assembly and we're going to get this slid back into place. It's going to get tight here, so just take your time. As far as the bag goes, you can actually compress that to give you a little bit more space. But again, keep an eye on where your alignment pin is because we're really trying to make sure that that's where it needs to be. And you'll see the top hole here. We have the forward and back ones here. We're going to be using the ones towards the front of the vehicle. So slide up that air fitting up, and that alignment tab should go into the bracket. You can hear it kind of snap in place. Now, that's where it's crucial to kind of bend this down, make sure that that tab is indeed going in that front one. Now ensure that your bottom bracket is still flush and sitting on the axle where it needs to be. Something that's interesting though is the flange bolt that we fed up into the airbag can cause that to rest on it. So you may need to shift the bag. That's why it's important you don't fully tighten it. You need to have a little bit of wiggle room to slide that side to side. And what we're looking for is trying to make sure that the bags are as vertical as possible, you know, nice and straight. It's not at any strange angles. And once we're happy with that, double check your lower bracket. And then I'm going to be using a chalk marker. And what we'll do is we're going to mark our bottom bracket along with the bottom plate here, just to make sure that it all stays aligned. So that way when we go up, we can know exactly where to put it, and it should align that top portion. And that's where having these marks comes in play, because we're going to take this back out, and you can see it's already moving on me, but that's okay, because we know exactly where we need it to be. At this point, if this outer bracket is kind of moving on you, you can go ahead and snug that back down. And then we'll get our airbag aligned with our reference marks that we made. And just about right here is where we're looking. And it might help to make a couple reference lines just to kind of make sure it's nice and lined up perfectly. I'm just hand tightening this for now just to kind of snug this up. Once we're happy with that, keep that in line, we'll go ahead and get this tightened down. And you might tighten this flange bolt down first. This bracket does kind of get in the way unless you're using a wrench, so kind of up to you, but you can see here we have this tightened up. We have all of our lines in place. We still have our bag in the right orientation, so that's a good sign. We have that tightened down. We can go ahead and get this put back in place, this whole assembly. And it's a good time, once you get it exactly where you want it, double check everything to make sure it didn't move. Now we'll grab our leaf spring bracket flange, and you'll see that it's curved in at the top. If you have it in this orientation, this should match the axle. So this is going to slide on the other side, clamping this all together. So to make it a little bit easier, you'll take your 4 long carriage bolts and pass it through the 4 longer slotted holes. And then we'll slide this down, making sure we're not pinching any lines here. And also that our carriage bolts are sliding through on the outside of our leaf spring packs on both sides. So with those passed through, we're going to take our flange nuts and we'll just get these tightened down just by hand here. Before we get everything snugged down around our leaf spring pack, we do also want to make sure we have our hardware up top, and that's just going to kind of keep everything in place. There's a large nylon lock nut. We're going to thread that onto the air fitting. We can get this tightened down with a 15/16 socket. Just make sure that bag stays in the alignment. And there is a torque setting associated with this found in the instruction manual, so I'll go ahead and grab my torque wrench. Grab your air fitting, and we're going to hand thread this into the top portion where we just put that nylon lock nut. And normally air fittings are brass, and you kind of go with a 1.5 turns, but it's not the case here. We have some nice steel, so we're going to grab, I found that a 12mm ratcheting wrench is going to be the best ticket here, and we're going to tighten it down until we engage all of that thread lock. So just until you see that color disappear, we'll start to tighten this down. Now we can get our carriage bolts all tightened down, and what I recommend is try to get these as level as possible by moving the bracket and hand tighten them down to where it's nice and snug and push it against the U-bolts on both sides, and that way it just kind of cinches it all together. It doesn't allow for any lateral movement. Once we're happy with that, we're going to tighten by alternating. So I'll do the top one here, the bottom one on the other side, and then just kind of go back and forth just like you would on lug nuts or something along those lines, just to make sure it gets tightened evenly. With our driver's side all mounted up, all that's left to do is get our passenger side in place. It's going to be the same steps. One thing that you are going to want to do that's going to be different is we have this heat shield that's just going to kind of go against, the exhaust to block the heat from the airbag before you tighten down that nylon lock nut. But you want to make sure that's in place while doing that. Once I get this one installed, we'll get our air lines ran, and I'll show you how to get that all done. Now, a small but crucial step when it comes to your air lines is cutting the lines. At some point, you're going to need to get that dual path, and it's very tempting to use just a set of side cutters here. The problem is it creates an almost almond shape, and that's not really going to seat very well in the push connect fittings. So to ensure a tight fitting in those push connect, I recommend getting a tubing cutter, cutting it nice and clean and straight. That way it maintains that circular shape, and that's going to bite into those push connect fittings a lot better. And what I'd recommend doing when routing your airlines is actually start at the back. You're going to have a big loop, and this way you can kind of determine exactly how much you need, but you know that you already have a clean path on the back side. And included in the kit is going to be this bracket, which is going to be really nice. You have obviously two sides for each Schrader valve, so you can have left and right. So make sure that you're running those accordingly to the bags. And this can mount up on the hitch wherever you really want it. I think I can do mine up here, and it's going to be a nice and clean look. You'll still be able to access this pretty well. There's tons of other options as far as mounting goes. Sometimes people will put them in the license plate bolts. Completely up to you, but the fact that this bracket's included is really nice. So I'll get this zip tied on. And we have our push connect fittings on our Schrader valve. I'm going to attach this to the airline that I already have here. And we're going to put a flat washer and then slide it into our bracket. And then finish it up with another flat washer and then our nut. And to snug that down, you can take a 13mm socket and just by hand snug this down. We'll get our other one put in place as well. As far as routing goes, we'll track the ones going to the driver's side bag. So there's this opening in the frame. From here, I just ran this up towards the frame rail. And I was able to use the factory wire loom to kind of zip tie this up and keep it out of the way. Along this shock mount, there's actually holes on both sides that I ran my airline through to get a nice clean path. I then zip tied it up to the wire loom that we have right by our bag. And as far as the push connect fitting, when you push that airline in, you should feel a little bit of pressure. Push that down, it should seat. And then once you have it pressed in, give it a quick tug just to make sure that it's in place. For our passenger airline, I just routed this over kind of underneath our tailgate above where our spare tire chute is, and then we just head over to the frame rail. And this is where I followed some factory wire loom. Now, it is important, there's going to be a sleeve included. You can see that kind of on our airline. Slide that over, and wherever it rests next to the exhaust, put that on there, and that's just going to help prevent that heat from breaking down the airline tube. And then we just attached it to our bag here. With everything attached, we can take an air compressor and fill up our bags. I'm just going to put about 50 psi in each of them, and we're going to do a leak down check to make sure that they're ready for the road. First step, obviously listen for any audible air leaks. And if that's the case, you are going to probably want to check the cut that you made on the airline tube and reseat it in the push connect fittings. Now, obviously make sure you bleed out the air pressure if you're going to disconnect it. But a good way to find any leaks that may not be audible is using a soapy water solution. Just spray all of your connections. You can soak them down. And we're going to do this on the bags too. And we're going to look for large air bubbles forming. And in fact, we can see that we actually have one forming on our Schrader valve push connect fitting. So I'm going to finish up checking all the rest of the where it attaches to the bags, and then I'm going to bleed out that air and take a look at the cut that I made and then reseat it in that push connect fitting. And I went ahead and I reseated this. I think it was just the angle that the airline was at, so I just kind of rerouted it, checked my connection, and made sure that it was nice and secure. We'll spray it down again. And nice easy fix there. Now all that's left to do is get our truck back down, put our spare tire up, and then we're ready to hook up to our trailer, adjust our bags accordingly, and hit the road. And that was a look at installation of the Firestone Airride Red Label Extreme Duty airbags on a 2024 Ford F-250.